All right. All right, I think we're live. I think we are live actually on Facebook. I guess we can wait like 2 minutes. We're a little early, but thank you guys so much for being here. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here amongst you wonderful ladies. So my name is Patricia Pitones, and I guess we can go ahead and get started and just kind of, get it going, because I know it's going to be a great conversation, and I'm so excited for everybody out here to enjoy this wonderful educational panel by these wonderful ladies who I consider Black excellence, and they are Black excellence. So yes, thank you guys so much for being here. My name is Patricia Pitonis. For those of you who do not know me, I'm the Bilingual Education and Outreach Specialist at SARC, the Sexual Assault Resource Center. And at SARC, we're a nonprofit organization where we provide completely free and confidential services to all survivors of sexual violence and assault, regardless of race, age, gender, sexual orientation, legal status, religion, disability, ability. It does not matter. Sexual violence and sexual assault can affect anybody. So we welcome every single body as well. So yeah, enough about me and enough about SARC. Let me get to these wonderful ladies. First off, we have Miss Chantelle Williams, and she is the Robertson County Coordinator for Success, powered by you, formerly known as Strengthening Families of the Brazos Valley. And she works as part of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. So absolute honor to have Miss Chantelle Williams. And I work with her as a partnership with Robertson County CRCG. I've known her a little over a year now, and I consider her a friend of mine. So thank you so much, Miss Chantelle. And also we have Miss Jazmin Jones, who is a full-time MBA program coordinator at Mays Business School. And she's also a SARC advocate. So I'm gonna kind of go into a little bit of the bios of each individual. So thank you guys so much, Miss Chantelle, Miss Jazmin, for being here alongside me to, educate everybody on the diversity and intersectionality of sexual violence. So Miss Chantelle Williams is an Alief, Texas native. She has resided in the Brazos Valley for over 10 years. She holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a minor in psychology. She has worked in the field of social services and community engagement for over 15 years and still going strong. You look better than ever, young as ever. She is the Robertson County Program Coordinator for Success, powered by you, formerly known as Strengthening Families of the Brazos Valley, through Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, which provides workshops on healthy relationships. It provides workshops on financial literacy and parenting. Ms. Chantelle Williams, if there's anything that you would like to add on, feel free.
Okay, so to just let everybody else be comfortable, I'm normal like you all. But I have been doing this for over 15 years, and it's something that I greatly enjoy. It's a passion that I love. And having a diverse background myself, it helps me to relate and do my job effectively. So as a mother of 4 boys, this is very important to me as well. It's just awareness, and then making them emotionally, mentally aware as they're growing and interacting with other people. And just watching what I do, them exhibit that to their friends and classmates and things to that effect. So just know that everything that we do, someone's always watching. And also, if you see me looking off, I am paying attention to the Facebook Live. So I'm trying to catch a few of the questions to help out on our panel tonight as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Chantelle. It's a privilege and an honor to have you on our panel. All right, so Ms. Jazmin. Jazmin is a higher education professional that prides herself as a change agent through creating culturally responsive education, workshops, and programs. Jazmin received a Bachelor of Science in Health Services Management and Master in Public Health with concentrations in behavioral, social, and community health and public health administration from Indiana University. She is a certified health education specialist, which means she's been formally trained in program planning, implementation, evaluation, and public health theories. Throughout her time at Texas A&M as a health promotion specialist, she used to work in the health promotion department. Jazmin has facilitated innovative programming during the COVID-19 pandemic through Facebook Live panels, virtual workout classes, and interactive social media campaigns and workshops. She has created a culturally responsive interpersonal violence prevention curriculum for Black students, international students, and LGBTQ+ students. Jazmin has had experience supervising and advising students through programs such as Aggie Elevate, and she has served on the activity resource and response team for the Division of Student Affairs. Jazmin also spent time co-leading the university-wide interpersonal violence working group, and she was the coordinator of the Green Dot Bystander Intervention Program, which reaches 2,000 participants each academic year. Go Jazmin. All of this has led Jazmin to establish stronger relations with campus and community partners, increase campus collaboration for violence prevention and awareness months, and create new initiatives and support colleagues in creating new initiatives. She has achieved the Voices Against Violence Award for her dedication and commitment. Jazmin has presented at local and national conferences about healthy relationships, consent, interpersonal violence prevention, and microaggressions. Jazmin is a doctoral student at Texas A&M University, pursuing a PhD in educational administration with an emphasis in higher education. Jazmin recently started a position as a full-time MBA program coordinator at Mays Business School, and is excited to continue to learn and grow as a higher education professional in this role. She is a social justice warrior and knows the importance of recognizing others' identities and perspectives. Her purpose in life is to empower, support, educate, encourage others through her lived experiences and education. So thank you so much, Jazmin. Is there anything you would like to add on? That it was awesome.
No, you told my whole life story. And y'all, I'm messaging Patty like, Patty, please don't read the long bio, please. But y'all, I am grateful that I've been able to do things that I love. And that makes me really happy. And so I am a doc student. I also am a SARC advocate. And so being a SARC, I haven't actually got to go on accompaniment yet. And so I'm excited. I've been here for about a year now. And so I just am honored to be here today. I'm happy that you thought of me when you decided to do this panel. And like Chantelle said, I am a normal person. Please don't pay attention to any of those acronyms, y'all. It actually makes me nervous when people read all that stuff out loud, because I'm really just Jazmin. And I just want to help students and help folks. That's it.
Thank you so much, you guys. So in honor of Black History Month, I do want to give a little bit of a background and a history of the actual month and how it originated. And I will also be discussing a couple of topics that may be triggering for a few individuals. We will have stories, topics, and issues that we will discuss that have sexual assault or violence in them. So I just want to give a trigger warning for everybody out there. If you do need any assistance, any help, please feel free to call our 24/7 crisis hotline at 979-731-1000. And I also want to give a special shout out to Miss Jillian Treadwell, who is a SARC advocate who collaborated with me and assisted me with research and panelist questions and guides. So if you're out there watching, thank you so much, Miss Jillian Treadwell. So in honor of Black History Month, Black History Month started in the US when American author and historian Carter G. Woodson founded the Association of the Study of African American Literature and History and Life. In February 1926, he launched the celebration of a historic week dedicated to teaching the cultural significance of the history of Black Americans. Woodson famously stated that if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated. Therefore, it was incredibly important to educate and bring awareness to the history of a group of people, especially in school history books, that had been commonly overlooked at the time or not included at all. Black History Month is more than a highlight reel of achievements where we celebrate the writers, the scientists, the artists, the leaders, but we must also examine what those like Fannie Lou Hamer, Frederick Douglass, Phyllis Wheatley, Ida B. Wells, and Malcolm X were fighting against. Their heroism was based on the fights against racism and white supremacy. So Black History Month and every month should be a time where we all recommit to advancing real solutions to Black poverty, racism, and affirming Black humanity, in addition to amplifying the work of all Black people, especially the work of Black women and the Black LGBTQ plus community. Is there anything that you ladies would like to add on? Awesome, I'll continue. All right, so another trigger warning I would like to point out to you guys. I'm gonna talk about some real life stories in terms of sexual assault and violence related stories. So the majority of the labor of sexual violence prevention and advocacy in the United States has historically been on the backs of Black women. One of the first known group of women to break the silence and speak out against sexual assault were African-American women who testified before Congress in response to a white mob gang raping of multiple Black women during the Memphis riots of 1866. So at this time, white men were legally allowed to rape enslaved Black women, and sexual assault continued to be used as a violent mechanism of oppression, power, and silencing for years to come. As a result, the civil rights era was a time in which Black women had to fight to claim ownership of their body, of their lives, and of their agency. And a powerful example of this is the case of Reese Taylor. Reese Taylor is an African-American woman who, despite being blackmailed, refused to stay silent. And she spoke out in 1944 against 6 white men who had abducted and brutally gang raped her. At the time, Rosa Parks was serving as a sexual assault investigator for the NAACP and spent countless hours working to ensure that Black people who had been sexually assaulted by white people could get their day in court, in addition to protecting Black men from false accusations and lynchings. This particular issue was so close to Parks' heart due to a white neighbor who attempted to assault her in 1931 and later said of the incident, "I was ready to die, but give my consent, never, never, never." But the attack of Reese Taylor, like many involving Black women during the Jim Crow era in the South, never went to trial. Two all-white, all-male grand juries refused to indict the men, even though one of them had confessed to the crime. So, is there anything that you ladies would like to add on? All right, here we go. So, with this panel, our goal for this panel is to discuss issues and topics related to sexual assault and violence and how it relates to the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, and overall diversity of survivors and service providers. So I kind of want to give you guys a little bit of a background on the definitions of diversity and intersectionality. So diversity, it's the range of human differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical ability or attributes, religious or ethical value systems, national origin, or political beliefs. And intersectionality was actually a term originally created and used by Kimberly Crenshaw to explain the oppression of Black women. So Kimberly Crenshaw is a law professor and social theorist who first coined the term intersectionality in her 1989 research paper, which was called demarginalizing the intersection of race and sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. So intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of people, or social problem that is affected by a number of discriminations and disadvantages. So it takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complex of prejudices they face. So basically, in other words, intersectional theory asserts that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression, whether that's their race, their class, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, religion, and other identity markers. So intersectionality recognizes that identity markers, for example, being a woman or being Black, do not exist independently of each other, and that each informs the others, often creating a complex convergence of oppression. So, for instance, Texas and Georgia, they have the largest populations of Black women working full-time year-round. So in Texas, Black women faced with multiple forms of oppression only make 58 cents for every dollar paid to the white non-Hispanic men. Native American women make 58 cents as well. In addition, Hispanic women only making 53 cents, compared to every dollar a white non-Hispanic man. So those are kind of, the inequities that we deal with on a daily basis, being a minority or being part of a marginalized and disenfranchised group. So, all right, is there anything that you guys would like to say before I get to the questions? Okay, awesome. I know it's a lot, but I'm excited. Thank you guys so much for everything. So one of the very first questions, and either one of you can start off, sexual violence and domestic violence rates have increased tremendously due to the pandemic, especially within marginalized communities. So how has the intersectionality of sexual violence affected Black and or African American communities, Latinx communities, Native American, Indigenous, and other people of color communities? For example, the LGBTQ+, immigrant. So what has been, what are some of the most main issues that we need to, uncover and work on? That you guys would say.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm going to hit it first and I'm going to try to be quick. Okay. So when we think about sexual violence and domestic violence, I think that it was really good that you gave this really foundation of some of the issues that Black Americans in this country have faced. And so when we think about the Jim Crow era, and we think about how Black men were falsely accused, we think about Emmett Till, those examples. But I think how that plays into situations now for Black women or folks that are in the LGBTQ+ community that are experiencing sexual violence or domestic violence is that anytime you try to hold a Black man accountable, you are now trying to bring a Black man down. And that in itself is problematic. And I think a lot of times people refer back to those examples of Jim Crow. And we know that in the Black community, Black women are more likely to experience sexual violence and domestic violence at the hands of Black men. We know that is happening right now in real time. And then we also can look at how does religion play a role in how sexual violence and domestic violence is handled within our Black community. So when we think about the Black church, and I'm talking about our Christian folks in particular, we think about how Black women are not allowed to have certain opportunities to speak up for themselves in the church. And so if they do experience domestic violence, they are told to stay with their husband because divorce is a sin. So what does that do if you're experiencing domestic violence? You're told not to leave and that you're supposed to work it out. You also see predatory men within the church that prey on younger women, and the younger women are told to sit down and cover up, and they don't necessarily deal with the issue. Then we can think about pop culture. And so we can think about the R. Kellys and the Bill Cosby and these men that have done heinous things. And for R. Kelly, those Black girls were never protected, and even now, oh, they're just coming out because of money, you know? And so even with that, we think about how rape culture and patriarchy and oppression is perpetuated within within the Black community as a whole. And so I always talk about how in the Black community, we have to get to a point where we learn how to have healthy relationships. And so that's where we have to start, because then we can start having conversations about, okay, if we're having healthy relationships, then we understand that we don't need power and control. We also understand that we don't have to live by these societal norms or standards of patriarchy where we have to oppress and hurt women. We don't have to have the ideology of a T.I. or a Lil Boosie, because I think about both of them and I'm like, well, you're problematic in nature and the things that they say and how they want to oppress women. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet because I can talk about that for a long time, but few issues, religion, big piece, okay? Also just sexual violence, domestic violence happening in the context of the Black community and us sweeping it under the rug and not having conversations. That's what I was trying to get at with all that. Chantelle?
Thank you, Jazmin. No, wonderful introduction. And yes, you touched on the religion. Religion plays a lot in many cultures. So not just African-American cultures as a whole, but it is very strong. As I can do a prime example of my divorce. I held on to my divorce a lot longer than I needed to because I didn't want to go to hell. You know, I was just like, I have to have a justifiable religious reason, not just legal, but religious reason on why I need to get this divorce so that it'll be honored and be honored in the eyes of God. And so that is very much so true. And it is a stigma for the African-American community, but not even just religion, because it often happens with people just out in the park. You know, we have our trail rides, we have our cultural gatherings and things to that effect that we do, which, you know, like they say, when we go to our African-American heritage in Africa, you know, the dancing and just the way that we express ourselves is not necessarily exploitation, whereas it is here. So if a young gentleman or older guy sees a young female dancing, and same vice versa, because African-American males are victims just as African-American females are, but we see them in these different environments and we are no longer giving them the freedom that this is just the freedom of expression if they're dancing or if they're doing something, versus having this sexual connotation in our minds. But I also think that that goes back to education. It is not talked about, you know, and when the birds and the bees is kind of like an indirect conversation that we have. So I think that that also alludes to this. And then being in a rural area, I am from Houston per se, you know, so I had a lot more resources and a lot of things that were taught to me at a very early age in elementary school, that when I came to the rural area and I sat on a school board and realized that some of our high schoolers weren't even prepared about, you know, sex education, health classes, and just that knowledge and that education alone. And so I think that that kind of diminishes the ability to voice our opinions, voice when something is wrong. Who do we go to? Who do we talk to? How do we not have that stigma when we say, you know, my cousin may have raped me, my brother may have raped me, my dad may have molested me? How do you have those healthy conversations? And as Jazmin alluded, going back to healthy relationships, going back to the freedom to speak. And oftentimes in many cultures, you know, children in that situation are unheard. You know, it's like, you're not to be heard, you're not to be seen, disappear. So when things happen, they don't know who to tell, how to say it. And then it also makes me think of trigger words. You know, every family has a different word for body parts and language that is used for different encounters. And sometimes you may not even realize that you are a victim. You know, we often think of the heinous assaults of rape and just those big things, but not even thinking about the grooming, you know, the touching, or come sit in my lap, and the child not having any idea, or a young lady having any idea that she's sitting in grandpa's lap and this is not about to go well. So just that conversation, I think that that's the missing piece, and knowledge. Again, being in the rural area and seeing the lack of knowledge from law enforcement, education, you know, even though teachers go through training and law enforcement goes through trainings, I think it is very hard to understand culturally, you know, when these things are happening, and that when one is expressing themselves, it's not necessarily because they're being irate. That sometimes it's how we talk. I know for me, I can be very loud, very strong with my words and my presentation. So I can come off as confrontational at times. And that's not, you know, I'm not angry. I'm not trying to be forceful, but understanding that. And I think that sometimes we lose empathy. So, you know, kind of getting back to what you were saying, I think that that is how intersectionality of sexual violence and assault and domestic violence is affecting us. And during this pandemic, again, it increased, it boomed, because now our children don't have the outlet of school, you know, wives don't have the outlets of their husbands or boyfriends going to work and vice versa. So now you're stuck in the house, and who do you call? You know, last year we couldn't go anywhere. So where were you going to go? What were you going to do? And I think that now it has brought it to the forefront, which I think will bring us into our second question. So I'll let you introduce our second question.
Okay, wait, Patty. I got one thing. Okay. So I was thinking as you were talking just about, so we've talked obviously about the Black community, but I think that it's important to know that, you know, I was thinking about our international students while I was sitting here. Mm-hmm. And knowing that when you have conversations about sexual violence and domestic violence, that those are things that if a person is not supposed to be having sex whatsoever, and you try to have a conversation about consent, they automatically shut down, or they get to a point where this is inappropriate and you shouldn't be talking about this to me. Or, you know, I went to an event at the mosque in town about domestic violence, and I was like, wow, like this is great, because this is meeting folks where they are. But I think a lot of times with our international students, they really don't understand. Correct. Because that huge cultural component of, well, a man is supposed to chase. And so I don't understand why I was ghosted. And so now I'm going to exhibit stalking behaviors because I don't understand this, because in my culture, this is how things are done. And so I think a lot of times we will approach, we see folks that do the work, they approach it from their Western lens of like, well, this is wrong. And it's like, wait a minute. If you come and tell somebody that what they're doing is wrong, they're going to be defensive. And so how do you help them understand that, okay, here's this is different, but maybe we can figure out other ways where we can still embrace your culture and help you understand why these things are problematic in American culture. And having those conversations, what I have people, they want to slap our international students on the wrist, and it's like, okay, have a deeper conversation with them so they'll actually understand the ramifications. And I've had conversations with students from Middle Eastern countries, and we had a lot more in common than I thought, because they're like, oh yeah, my mom and my family don't talk about certain things. And I'm like, oh, my grandma won't talk about that type of stuff either. And so I think that that's important when we think about those cross-cultural dynamics. And then Chantelle brought up this really good example of the health education piece. And so I'm from Indiana, and my mom talked to me about sexual health, and we had conversations, and, you know, I knew the right terms and all those things. But working at a university, we meet so many students where no one had a conversation at all with them. And then we think in our marginalized communities, they are not getting the information from their parents. They're getting it from Facebook or YouTube, which they don't even use Facebook anymore. So TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, you know, or they're watching porn to get that information. And so I think a lot of times within cultural communities, it's like, okay, we're not going to have the conversation because it makes us uncomfortable, but it's like you're putting your child literally at risk. And then we also know one thing, and then I'm be done with, when a child witnesses domestic violence in their home or any form of interpersonal violence, they are more likely to experience it as an adult. And so when people are like, well, what is the best thing that I can do so my daughter will be safe? I'm like, be a good man to her mom, do these things and role model those good behaviors, because if a child sees an unhealthy relationship, they are more likely to replicate that. And so what I have saw in the Black community in particular is that you have folks, my generation, they want to have healthy relationships. They don't want to do what great grandma did, and because they're like, oh, great grandma was married for 50 years, but grandpa had a family on the other side of town and he was doing all types of things. And so even now there is this desire and this hunger to learn and grow. Even though we saw this increase in rates, I still think that we are moving in a better direction. That's all.
I do want to add, in terms of the Latinx community, Latino, Latina, Native American, immigrant communities, you know, a lot of the issues there, they most likely are underreported or they don't report at all, because going back to, you know, there's language barriers, there's the difference in faith, religion, the culture, their ties to their families. So, you know, a lot of these communities keep that very to themselves and private, so they don't feel comfortable talking about this. So like Chantelle and Jazmin said, education is a key, important part to this, and not only education, but comprehension, you know, because we can educate them all we want, but if they don't comprehend and understand the severity and the importance of this, then, you know, the prevention efforts can be, you know, negatively impacted. But also the lack of culturally competent service providers as well. And a lot of individuals are unaware of the different cultures, that maybe they have their own racial biases, their own, you know, approach, and maybe they're giving racial microaggressions. So it also depends on having culturally competent and culturally and racially sensitive individuals to help with these survivors, because survivors want people who look like them, can speak their same language, and, you know, experience and relate to them in whatever, whether that's, you know, the color of your skin or the language you speak. You know, these are the issues that need to be, you know, worked on. So yes, that leads me to my next question. As sexual assault and domestic violence shelters, other service providers, and academic institutions begin to publicly support the Black Lives Matter movement, it has been suggested that some law enforcement agencies have in turn cut ties with programs. As the support divides, do you think that sexual violence and domestic violence survivors are still getting the advocacy necessary and the prevention efforts that are necessary? Or do you think it's kind of had a negative impact on survivors in speaking up?
I'll kick it off. I cannot say, I can't speak to the impact. I'll state that. I cannot speak to the impact that it has because I don't have those statistics. I think it's fairly new with Black Lives Matter and where it stands on that, and that we are kind of crossing the lines of what the basis of their organization was in support of how we are underreported and unable to kind of verbalize what we need. So I think that it has given some enthusiasm to being able to voice your opinions, and that if you have been a victim of one who has reported an incident and it was kind of swept under the rug or kind of pushed away, that now they have an additional resource that they can reach out to, you know, because along with the Black Lives Matter, you also have the Me Too program as well. So I think that now it is bringing awareness to what groups are out there, because speaking to Brazos Valley, there are not a lot of resources in our areas. There are not advocacy programs that I know outside of our sexual resource center. There are places and people of contact if you need to report an incident, but to get that actual support and advocacy and that push, and then being able to identify with an advocate where I can identify with them, I can relate, you know, we don't have that available. So I think that it has opened the door for possibilities and increase in awareness and being more vocal and seeing action taken on these situations. I do believe that. And I think with there being a cut in ties, it's kind of a catch-22, you know. I think it shows where some of these departments have always stood and where they held on to that control and how they could control the narrative of what got reported, how it was investigated, and whether they could actually come up with a charge or not. So I feel like it's kind of now you leave the door open for another agency to come in and now hold them accountable that this ball is not going to drop with the police department. But now I have someone else who might be a little bit more educated, who might know more about this situation, be able to use terminology that I might not know to get the ball rolling on the legal side. And so now I think it kind of opens up, that door and that opportunity to make things happen. So I'll pass it on to Jazmin.
Yeah, so, as Chantelle mentioned, there's not a lot of research out there. So I'm going to give y'all Jazmin's opinion, okay? I think in my opinion, I definitely feel like it's a catch-22 because we know that the data is out there that Black women die at higher rates of homicide. And so, knowing that they die at higher rates of homicide, so they're not gonna mark that as a domestic violence situation. They might just mark it as a homicide if they were killed by their partner with a firearm. And so in my brain, I think about those types of situations where you actually may need law enforcement, and I'm usually not the one to say that, but that is a situation where I think about it, like, if you actually need it, you might not need a social worker to come out. You need law enforcement to come out for those situations. And so I think for me, in my opinion, it feels like these movements may prevent survivors from reaching out. And so we already know that our marginalized communities don't report anyway, but I just know that calling the police would not be my first option because, what if they come to my house and this person is murdered, or I'm murdered, and I think that sometimes those are the things that come to mind. And then also when I think about the Me Too movement, how it was started by a Black woman, but we know it was whitewashed, and Black women still weren't able to have space to share their stories and feel empowered. And so I do think that one of the positives, though, is that you are seeing people's true colors. People are understanding how institutional racism is working in real time, and how when you interact with governmental systems as a Black or brown person, that your experiences are different, whether that's at a hospital or police, your experiences are different. And I think that people are understanding that. And to me, it's like, oh, the light bulb went off, and so I think that's the plus. But I also saw police departments have really great social workers and have advocates, victim survivors advocates there that talk to every survivor that walks through the door. Texas A&M has an amazing advocate that works there, Kristen Brunson. And so, and even at IU, we had someone that worked with our police. And so in those spaces, I'm like, yeah, I will refer you to her because I know that she's going to provide you that trauma-informed care that you need. And so I think that if we get to a point where, maybe they do cut ties, but they have an advocate, they have someone else that can be culturally responsive and support those survivors of color, it's really important to break down those barriers so they will be more comfortable reporting. Because even at the university, the students aren't comfortable going to Title IX. They're not comfortable going there and reporting and getting resources. And so that's how SARC and Phoebe's Home and all of our other local agencies are seeing our students, because on campus, they're like, well, where do I go? Or will someone on campus even believe me because what I look like? Because they know how things may happen on our campus based on your skin color. And so I think that a lot of us that are doing the work are trying to work in the right direction to create those avenues where our Black and brown survivors feel supported. So yeah, and one last thing, I was just thinking about the trans community here, and I really appreciate how we are, even with our trans community, understanding the depths of violence that they've experienced by the police, and figuring out ways, how do we support them? How do we amplify their voices so we can create safer experiences for them as well?
I'm glad that you mentioned the LGBTQ plus community and the trans community. Shout out to Marsha P. Johnson, who was actually one of the very first transgender Black activists to part of the Stonewall riots in terms of, LGBTQ plus rights. and as well as, you know, she experienced sexual assault in her lifetime. So yeah, thank you so much, Jazmin, for bringing that up. That reminded me of Miss Marsha P. Johnson, who is part of the Black community, and it's an honor to, you know, be able to name drop her because she's pretty cool. On to our next question, though. It kind of going back to cultural competence and cultural competency and the importance of that. Why is it so important of not being only culturally aware, but culturally competent, especially as a victim or a survivor-centered professional? And what are some barriers to these resources? I know we mentioned a couple, but what are some barriers to these resources to and from a survivor and a provider? So, and how does it impact people of color or marginalized groups? And what can we do at the community level and individual level to improve on these issues?
All right, I guess I'll take that one. I'll go first. So when it comes to cultural competence and just being culturally aware, when I think about diversity, inclusion, and equity, I think a lot of times people that sometimes will work in public health or work in certain areas are like, well, I don't have to worry about that. You know, that's not something I need to worry about. That's not my thing. Like, I don't get into politics. I hear people say all types of those things. And I think to do this work well, you have to be trauma informed and you have to be culturally competent. Like, there's no way around that. Because when you have a survivor that, for example, maybe they are from a Middle Eastern country and they're talking to you about their barriers, you have to be able to understand that, okay, if they feel like they know that they need support, but they're scared to access these resources because what if their parents find out? What if, you know, are they not going to be able to get married because maybe somebody's going to call them tarnished? Like, what are these ramifications behind this? And how do you provide them the best support and the best resources? And then how do you also make sure that you don't say and do anything that is going to be more harmful to them? And you have had so many survivors of color that have interacted with social workers, public health professionals, advocates, and they said the wrong thing at the wrong time. And this person was not able to start their healing journey. And so, you know, one of the first things that's coming to my mind is I'm thinking about our sex workers. And so, you know, I think about our sex workers, or I can think about those that have experienced human trafficking, and knowing that a lot of them are Black and brown. And so if you are constantly getting arrested for prostitution, I'm gonna say it in quotes, right? No one is asking the question. No doctor, no nurse, no social worker. Nobody's asking the question is why do you keep ending up in the hospital? Why do you keep ending up at the police station? No one is taking the time to ask that question because of their implicit bias, because their own perception that this is why this person is doing that. And so I think even with that, are you checking your privilege when you are working with survivors and understanding we all have privilege? Like, I tell people that all the time, like, I'm getting a PhD in higher education. Like, who gets to do that? And like, you know, but yes, I still am a Black woman. Yes, I still have to deal with all the things that comes along with that. But yes, I have access to lots of things and lots of information. And so when I come into a space and I talk to Black women from a low socioeconomic status, and there, you know, I had a situation that was very humbling where I had to talk to some women with children about nutrition. They introduced me with my accolades. That was the worst thing they could ever did, because those women were like, she don't identify with us. She don't know I struggle. And so even with that, how do you meet people where they are as a professional so you can connect with them? So maybe I'm coming into a space that I'm not telling you anything. I'm just Jazmin. How you doing? You know, that's what I'm here. That's what I'm here for, because you want to be relatable. You want to be able to connect with them. And I think a more often than not, you have folks that get so caught up in the accolades and all the things that they know that they don't take the time to get to know that person right here in the moment. That's all I got.
All right. I think Jazmin touched on quite a bit of it, and I can speak from experience, personal as well as professional. Like I said in the very beginning, I come from a very diverse background, and when you see me, oftentimes, yes, I am clouded by what I look like because of the job that I have, because I'm an African-American female that works for a major university. I went to college. I speak well. I articulate my words, certain things that I have personally been told. But I know working in social services, working for CPS, working for different agencies and having to identify with my clients, what I did was meet them on their level, which has been said quite a bit. And then one of our viewers also mentioned about breaking that cycle, and that was something that for a long time, like I said, personally, I battled with everything that I went through. And I'm like, God, what does this mean to me? Why am I going through this? Made no sense. As you stated in the very beginning, my degree is in criminal justice. I have yet to use that degree in criminal justice. Because my journey took me into social services. And in social services, I realized that I could identify, I could relate. There was a state of empathy that I could give to my clients and also empower them at the same time, that though it happened to you, you can be more than that, and that you have a voice, and don't let anybody steal that power, that joy, or anything from you. And I think it is hard to be culturally competent if you have never encountered it or experienced it as yourself. And I have sat in a knowing who you are training on many different levels. And it is very hard to get people to think outside of the box and their norms. And so with that, I think when we are teachers, when we are in that professional field, when we are in law enforcement, that we have to really step outside of you, what you believe, what you think, and really be listening to what they're saying. And as Jazmin said, I've met people of many cultures. I grew up with that, so I had a respect for cultural diversity long before I even knew what it was, because it was second nature for us. When we had cultural day in elementary school, I learned different foods and cultures and habits and rituals and traditions. And so when I came to Brazos Valley, it was a little different, because now I kind of stepped back into time where I was like, oh, okay, well, we kind of sit in our corners. We don't talk to them over there, or, it's like, and then too, that cultural diversity is really hard here. So you see it on the university level, but you might not see it in your neighborhood. I lived in a community where it was predominantly Caucasian and African American, period. And Caucasians lived on one side of the railroad tracks, literally. So I don't say this figuratively or something that I've heard, literally. And so knowing that cultural diversity, whereas again, my African Americans stay on their side, Caucasians stayed on their side, and now I'm watching children suffer in the state of education because Caucasians, most of their children have grown out of the school, or they go to school somewhere else. So making sure that resources are available and that we are able to give them that access that they need, we basically just cheat ourselves out of that cultural diversity. So you have to be culturally competent, but in order to be culturally competent, you have to step outside of your norms. And that is very, very hard for many people. And as Jazmin mentioned, with this privilege, when we are an officer or a person of stature, sometimes we let that be our shield and we put that before the actual human nature, that human bond, that human interaction. And that goes into healthy relationships. If you don't know how to have a healthy relationships, then you hide behind these facades that hinder you from being able to help someone. Sit on the sidewalk with a victim and say, hey, what's going on, before you judge them. As I was talking to a friend, when you have a 12-year-old who walks in and is having a baby, did anybody ask this baby what happened? How did this happen? Because I now had to explain this to my 12-year-old son because his classmate is having a child. So where are we helping them in that cultural diversity and that cultural knowledge of what's going on? So I think I've harped on it enough, but yeah, I think that is where we're lacking. I think that is the gist of our entire conversation, is the lack of resources, the lack of knowledge and preparation for these things, because sometimes people can catch you off guard. And like Jazmin mentioned, being very careful of what you say, how you say it, and not triggering that victim. And it's hard because sometimes they're sitting there in silence and they never say a word to you, and you don't know that you just shut that person out, you know, and that you just killed that space for them. So I know in my classes at work, I always tell them I'm available to you, you know, that we are going to discuss some things that we may not be able to discuss right then and there. And if you have something personal, then let's kind of save that one for the end, or when we have time for us one-on-one, trying to create that safe place for them so that we can get there. Because going back to being culturally competent, if I can teach you, then maybe you can help somebody else. And that's the goal. Like I said earlier with my kids, you don't know who's watching you when you do what you do, when you say what you say, how you present yourself, and how they may give that same example to the next person. Okay, I'm officially done.
Well, that is great. I'm gonna just add a little bit because you guys pretty much covered everything, but those factors, you know, such as those language barriers, that cultural knowledge, that sensitivity, and the acquiring of cultural skills through victim, survivor, and service provider interaction, like Ms. Chantelle was saying, I know firsthand. So growing up in East Texas, it was predominantly white area, very conservative, and a lot of racist individuals. So just imagine, you know, an immigrant Mexican family with parents who didn't speak a lick of English. So watching that as a kid, them experiencing that, as well as me, you know, those racial injustices, we had, you know, individuals who would say, you need to speak English, or you need to, because of, you know, they thought less than because they couldn't speak the English language, even though they spoke Spanish. So that kind of also was, you know, such an important part of my life, and why I am the way I am, and helping, you know, not only my Hispanic community, my Latinx community, but my Black community, my LGBTQ+, my immigrant community, Native American, all the communities, because at the end of the day, like I said, sexual violence and sexual assault discriminates. Again, it does not discriminate at all whatsoever. It can happen to anyone and everyone. And so that's why we have to raise that awareness, to get that word out there and know, and let people know, of people of all colors and all communities, that we are here to provide that service for you. Thank you guys so much. That leads to my next question. Let me pull it up on here. I have it. Give me 1 second. But that leads to the next question of, you know, statistics often show that marginalized communities are far more vulnerable to sexual violence. What, in your opinion, or in your professional experience and personal experience, can be done to rectify the exploitation of this vulnerability? And what can we do as professionals to help alleviate and eradicate this problem?
I don't know that you can eradicate it, honestly. That's just human nature. The goal is to, but it's human nature. But I think what we have to do is hold people accountable. Accountability is everything. And what we were speaking to when you want to incorporate what I was trying to say in regards to Black Lives Matter is, where's that support group at? Who do they go to? You know, the Sexual Assault Resource Center is available, but why is that the only program that's available? Why is that the only group? So I think in order to do that, and to address that vulnerability, to address the injustices, to address the silent ones, our victims who are suffering in silence, is creating these support groups. You know, how can we get together? How can we form these organizations? What do we need to do? And again, it goes back to education. It goes back to informationals. Like, so I greatly appreciate you doing this. And I hope that this is not the last one, because it's not just about African Americans. This is something, like you said, it doesn't discriminate at all. You know, and I think in order to do that and address that vulnerability is also stop seeing color, stop seeing this race, stop seeing this economic status, and see the human being, that a human being was violated from their own personal privacy. Something was taken away from them. And that shouldn't have anything to do with where I live, who my parents are, you know, or anything to that effect. And that someone with, quote unquote, who has more money than me can afford an attorney, and that I may not get the justice that I need. And again, as I initially said, accountability. We have got to start holding people accountable, even in our professional status, because sometimes it is swept under the rug. And it's okay to stand up. But again, I also empathize and understand that when you don't have that support, who wants to be the Lone Ranger? You know, who wants to be the martyr for the cause? And that is often I think the issue that I see in my area, in this area of Brazos Valley, is that nobody wants to be the martyr. But, you know, how do we come together to support each other? How do we start raising awareness? How do we start getting out into our communities? How do we start advocating for our schools, making sure that health education is being provided, that children know what these terms are, know that, okay, wait a minute, what does consent look like? What does nonverbal consent look like? What does texting look like? And sexting and all of these things, and being very careful that it's okay to send a picture, but send a picture of your smile. That's it. You know, but again, that goes into, I think, education and awareness. And so I think we've got to increase that somehow, some way. And I think it just comes with starting with what you're doing. We're starting here. We have a few viewers here, but it takes a few to start building up and just branch out from there. So don't stop, just keep going.
And so, you know, when I think about how do we make this population, and I'm speaking of our Black community, how do we make them less vulnerable? And so the first thing that, you know, is very important is let's have the conversations. So within families, I think about generational trauma, and I talk about this anytime I can. But I have saw so many families where they've been experiencing interpersonal violence for 3-4 generations, and no one has talked about it. No one has sought support. No one has gotten therapy. Nobody has even talked to their pastor about it. And they don't understand, but this keeps happening. It keeps happening. And so to me, someone in the family. So, okay, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm gonna say, okay, I saw my mama do this. I saw my grandma do it. And I want to be the link in the chain that's going to make the change, because at the end of the day, I couldn't control the trauma that happened to me, but I definitely can control how I heal. And so I think in those situations, when you do experience domestic violence, sexual assault, are you doing the work to heal so you can set that example for the next generation, whether that's your nieces, nephews, your children? And I always tell people we're going to be someone's ancestors one day. And so what are we putting out there for them to grapple with and deal with? Because when it comes to interpersonal violence, if you see it, you're more likely to experience it. And this stuff continues to happen. And so, you know, are we speaking up and having those conversations in our family? And then also, are we holding people accountable? When Chantelle said that, I was like, yes, we have to hold people accountable. And, you know, we talk about cancel culture all the time, and we see it out in the media. Oh, this is cancel culture. But what happens when it's somebody you love and you care about? How do you call them in and have that conversation and let them know that what they did is problematic and they never need to do it again? Because it's happening. Some people are like, well, it wouldn't be my loved one. It wouldn't be this. It wouldn't be that. And it's like, you don't know that. And so are we having those conversations? Are we calling people out at the family functions that are telling little girls to cover up? Why are you looking at your niece like that? Because that's Jazmin's question. We know she's 10. Yes, she's a 10-year-old. She has chest. We see that, but why are you sexualizing this little girl? Because my problem is with you. I'm not going to shame this little girl because her body is developed. We're not doing that, because now, you know, when I think about rape culture, and it's a lot more than just, sexual assault. It is, what are these seeds that we're planting of body shame and humiliation? And okay, well, you know, if you would have covered up, your uncle wouldn't have touched you. And people will say that to people. And so how do we, even with that of, okay, I'm going to call out this behavior, because we don't want someone to grow up with guilt and shame. And then also, when we notice little girls, specifically little girls I'm thinking about, and they're hypersexual, do not call them promiscuous. Do not shame them. Have a conversation. If you have a 13-year-old girl and she's getting STI, something is happening. Don't call the little girl fast. Don't call her. Pull her in. See what is happening instead of shaming her. Because guess what? That's not going to help that's not going to heal. And so for me, it's a lot of taking the time, calling out those problematic behaviors that you're seeing, achieving those healthy relationships, because at the core, we need healthy relationships, respect, honesty, communication, trust. We need those things. And to me, if we just start there, that's going to make our communities less vulnerable. And also, when we think about, and I think about Black men in particular, what does it mean to be a Black man? And when we have those real life conversations of what does that look like, it's okay to cry. It's okay to respect all women, even if it's not your mama, your sister, or somebody you're sleeping with. You know, how do we get to that point where we're teaching folks to respect? We're teaching folks to don't call a woman outside of her name. Let's praise Meg Thee Stallion and praise Michelle Obama, because guess what? That's Black on, and we look different. And guess what? Most times we a little bit of Michelle and we a little bit of Meg, and that's how we work out. We're not just one or the other. And so be okay with that. And I think when we get to a point where we have learned to really love ourselves, because when we think back to slavery, and I'm gonna wrap this up quickly, but we think back to slavery, African-American people or African people, we weren't violent. We weren't this way. And so we've adopted these violence and all these things that were perpetuated on us. And so let's get back to loving each other, caring for each other, and holding each other on the process that we can generate that may change. Chantelle mentioned this. I would love if we could eradicate sexual assault, domestic violence, but we got a lot of work to do, but we can work.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Jazmin. That was awesome. I do have one more question, and then we could wrap it up. And this goes for both of you ladies. So Jazmin and Chantelle, you have worked or do work closely with students and individuals of all backgrounds, all cultures, same with me. But for example, those marginalized or disenfranchised in a rural or in urban communities. So is it safe to say that racial and ethical disparities and inequities are prominent and can extend all the way to sexual assault nurse examinations, SANE exams? Also, for example, COVID-19 vaccination reaching more white communities than Black communities, and also Black mothers are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth. So what actions need to be taken to ensure that the racial and ethical disparities cease, for example, when performing a sexual assault exam and other things like that?
You just lit a fire underneath me. Get out and do the work, because I will be honest, I don't watch the news. So if I don't hear from someone, if I don't hear it in my community, and it sounds crazy, but really, truly getting back to grassroots. I don't care if it's just a little flashcard that says, hey, have you ever been a victim? Do you know a victim? If so, contact this number and put it on the door and keep it moving. You don't always have to preach. You don't have to harp, because you'll get more attention when you give them something that they can read in their space and their understanding. Ask some questions. Google is great because everybody wants to be philosopher of Google. And I mean, make it happen, but just putting it out there. I don't see anyone in my community. I couldn't tell you of a resource out here. So as I stated to you earlier, this is where we start, continuously having these conversations, having these panels, and then how do we form an organization to get out? How do we get this on Facebook? How do we get this into our communities? How do we get this into our schools? Get out there and do the footwork. And I know that right now, the pandemic has put us in a lot where we can't do a lot of face-to-face. And so we now have to get real creative, but it is, again, accountability. And if that means I have to be accountable, then now I have charged myself, because I'm on this platform and I have to practice what I preach. I cannot tell someone else to do it if I'm not going to do it myself. So now I have to bring awareness. I have to kind of increase this on my webpage and on my Facebook and things to that effect. But again, also creating those resources, because if I tell them, hey, go out, say something, preach about it. Where do I send them? Where do they go? So there is lots and lots and lots of work to do, but get out there. And we're gonna have to go old school as far as I'm concerned, especially where I live. Like I said, I live in a rural community. So if you're not hitting the people who they know, then they don't hear it. And where I lived, I've lived in several communities in Robertson County where I was in the know, whereas now I might see 10 other people that look like me. So, and I'm only 15 minutes away from where I was prior, and that's all the difference in the world. So it's like, how do me and her communicate, because I don't hear anything, from different resources. I just moved to this community, so I don't know these people, quote unquote. So getting out there and making sure that it's open to everybody, posted at the post office, like I said, just a little simple, hey, do you know about this? Something. And I'll let Jazmin pick.
And so what I think about with this is bringing your own table. I think a lot of times we are like, oh, I need a seat at the table. No, it's time to bring your own table. And so when I think about health disparities, so we're thinking about, okay, these infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates. We're thinking about what folks are experiencing in the hospital. So as a Black woman, even with a high health literacy, even with a mom as a nurse, that I can send my mama my labs and she can tell me what's wrong with me, I still experience discrimination when I have to navigate health systems. And it's like, I'm not the one. And I don't say that to them, but that's how I feel. Like, try me not. But even with that, how do we get more Black doctors, more Black nurses, more of these people of color in these spaces? Because there's research out there, and I read it, that when a Black woman is taken care of by a Black nurse or a doctor during childbirth, she's more likely to have healthier outcomes. I paraphrase that. But so how do we get these folks in the field? And I know for me, I'm getting a PhD because guess what, y'all? Higher education needs reform. And so if I have to be the reform, I will be the reform. I'm not just getting the PhD for myself. I got to get some folk out the way, because we need change. And so how are you being a change agent in your area? And so, okay, if I'm a nurse, what am I doing there? If I'm a pastor, what am I doing there? If I'm just a person that watched this on Facebook and I just want to have a conversation with one of my friends tonight, what are you doing to make the change? So are we talking about Black doulas and Black midwives? So, because maybe the hospital is not your thing, but how are we making sure that these things are safe? When we're thinking about COVID-19, are we making sure that we're not looking like Atlanta, having all the parties and all the get-togethers and all the things? Are we taking those measures to protect ourselves, since we know that Black folks are dying? Our Black and brown people are dying of COVID-19, and so we definitely have to get to a point of where, okay, I'm bringing my own table and I'm going to do the work, because dismantling these systems is not going to be easy, and it's going to take time, and we all have to do something, and so if Chantel's going to be knocking on people's doors and cool. If Jazmin going to be kicking and screaming and at her job, volunteering, whatever I need to do, because everybody's work is going toward that common goal to really create a more healthy society for our Black and brown folks, our LGBTQ folks, so they can thrive.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jazmin. That was amazing. Can you guys still hear me? If you guys, I think it might have, yes,
we can still
hear. Okay, awesome. Well, yes, thank you guys so much for your expertise, your knowledge, so informative. Is there any other resources that you guys would like to talk about? Shameless plug before I wrap this up with our SARC services. Is there any resources or any last minute comments or feedback?
Okay, so I'm gonna do the shameless A&M plug, because that's what I should do. So if anyone wants to learn more about interpersonal violence prevention programming, alcohol and other drugs, as well as just general wellness, visit Health Promotion at tamu.edu. That is my former office. They do amazing work over there. Dr. Denise Krisafi is over the interpersonal violence prevention work, and she coordinates the Green Dot program as well as Stand Up program, which they're both great. And so if you are on campus and you're watching this, please go to the website and book a workshop. They also do consultations. So if you have questions, if you need condoms, they have all the things. And then I think that's it. That was the only shameless plug that I had. I just wanted to plug my old office. And we have lost Patty, y'all. So Chantelle, I think you can do your shameless plug, and hopefully Patty's gonna come back.
All right, so hopefully we'll get Patty back soon. So Sexual Assault Resource Center is pretty much what I have. Like I said, I service a rural area, so there's not too many opportunities that we have, but I do know that through our Sheriff's Department, we do have our Crime Victims Liaison, who also has an outlet to the different sources and community members that are with the Brazos Valley that service our area. I also sit on the board of our CRCG, which is our Community Resource Collaboration Group for Robertson County. So if you need to reach out to me or anything to that effect, I feel so bad right now because we're not in our offices. We're still kind of out of the office due to our pandemic, but you can reach me by email. Patty has my information. So if you call SARC, I promise you she can get a hold of me because that is our goal. That is our job. That is what I do, is that if there's a need, I do my best to try to get you connected to whatever resource that it is. Because typically when there's one issue, there's like 5 hiding underneath that one. And so that is something, that's my shameless one. And I thank SARC for what they do.
And so Patty is texting me frantically because she cannot get back into the meeting. And so, you know, I know SARC has some stuff that they want to tell y'all. So I'm hopeful that Lauren is watching or some of our SARC people are watching. Please throw it in the chat because Chantelle and I are going to wrap this thing up. We're grateful that you all had us here tonight. Patty has all of our contact information as well as the folks at SARC. Feel free to reach out to us. And Patty's back. Woohoo! Patty, I was going to wrap it up for you.
I'm so sorry, everybody. My internet cut out. What did I miss? I apologize sincerely.
Just SARC's information and how people can reach out.
So once again, Ms. Chantal Williams, thank you so much, and Ms. Jazmin Jones. My name is Patricia Pitonis, a Bilingual Education Outreach Specialist at SARC, the Sexual Assault Resource Center, where we provide completely free and confidential services to all survivors of sexual violence. And that includes our 24/7 crisis hotline. You can give us a call at 979-731-1000, or please go visit us on our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Go like, subscribe, share all of our content, and be sure to tune in for some giveaways. We're going to give out some stress balls, some koozies. But yeah, just follow us and share our information, everybody. It all starts with us individually to make a change. And like Ms. Chantelle and Ms. Jazmin, they're agents of change. And I'm so honored to know them and consider them my friends. And like I said, thank you once again for your attendance here and your expertise in this amazing topic that certainly needs to be discussed and addressed in order to prevent sexual violence in all communities. So once again, thank you guys so much. If there's any last words that you need to say. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Sincerely appreciate every single one of you. And for everybody tuning in, if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to call our crisis hotline or email us at reachingout@sarcbb.org. All right, that's our time. Be sure to stay tuned for our future panels and future panelists. Thank you guys so much, and you guys have a great night. Bye-bye.